Okay, first off, we're going to talk about how an author characterizes a character. All right, it's going to be one of two ways, either through direct characterization or indirect characterization. Through direct characterization, the narrator flat out tells us what a character's personality is. The narrator says he is a rakish, dark, mean fellow. All right, the narrator directly tells you flat out how it is. To tell you the truth, in more modern books, this is a little bit more rare. What is more frequent is indirect characterization. That is where the narrator shows us what the character is going to be like. And they do so generally through these means. So we have a little acronym for you here, STEAL, STEAL. And this is how the narrator shows us what the character is like. It can be either through the character's speech, through the things that that character says, we can probably infer who they are, what they like, and what their beliefs are. Through their thoughts, often, through narration, we do see inside a character's head, we see what they think, and because we see what they think, we know who they are. E, the effect on others, we can judge by how, just like in real life, how someone treats another character, or how that character is affected by our protagonist. We can really see who they are inside. A, actions. That's probably the biggest one. Through the character's actions, we can make inferences about who they are. And finally, looks. By the way the character describes how they dressed and how they look, we can make some assumptions, sometimes unfair assumptions, but mostly when we're dealing with reading, fair assumptions about who their personality is and who they are. So, through direct and indirect characterization, that is how the author communicates to us who these characters are. So, there's a few different ways to classify how characters act and behave. So when we're talking about characters, these are some of the terms that we're going to use. First two terms are round versus flat characters. Round characters are well developed, they're realistic, and sometimes because of that, they are contradictory in the way they behave. They're more like a real person. You see all their flaws, you see their wants, their desires, you kind of really get into their head. Now flat is kind of the opposite, as you would imagine. Flat characters have very few personality traits. They're often stereotypical, they fall into some kind of category, whether you know a jock, a villain, a nerd, a geek, whatever. And they're never really the protagonist because they are so flat. They're usually extra characters, which we'll kind of go into later. So, round or flat, two ways to categorize a character. Two other ways to categorize your characters are dynamic versus static. Dynamic is when a character changes throughout the story, and that change is permanent. This usually relates to our protagonists because as we see, as the conflict happens to them and they go along through the story, they are somehow changed by the events of the story. So they are usually dynamic. Static is different. Static characters do not change. Their personality, their motivation, their perception, their habits, their outlook, nothing changes about them. They usually just stay the same. Sometimes that's the it's not the protagonist, sometimes that is the antagonist. The classical villains. So, there you go. Dynamic versus static, and round versus flat. Now, as you might have guessed, these terms kind of go hand in hand. The round characters usually are dynamic, and the flat characters are usually static. Alright, now we're going to talk about two types of characters. First off is a foil. A foil is a character who exists to enhance a main character because of their contrast to that main character. They're usually a sidekick of some kind. We can think of Cinderella. If the author wants to show Cinderella's goodness, we have the evil stepsisters. The evil stepsisters really exist to show the contrast between them and our wonderful good Cinderella. Or they can be like Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. We see that Han Solo is really the roguish kind of cowboy who runs into things, is a little bit jaded. You'll notice that he's wearing a little bit more black. And Luke Skywalker is the pure, innocent young boy who only wants to do the good thing, the right thing. So Han Solo's function is to kind of contrast with Luke Skywalker. He is Luke Skywalker's foil. Secondly, we have stock characters. Stock characters are your flat, static characters usually, who they fit that stereotype. They come from a certain stock or category. You could have a million of them. So they're generally pretty minor characters in a story. They're like the ruthless businessman, the dumb jock, or the stuffy old teacher. Everybody knows these types. And so putting those well-known types into a story kind of is a useful, easy thing for an author to do.